Well, thank you everybody. Welcome to Rochdale. I'm Colin Lambert, the leader of Rochdale Council. The Council announced its formal investigation into our decision making in relation to Noel View back in January 2014. We instructed Andrew Warlock QC to carry out this review. Considerable progress has been made in terms of collating and analysing documentation and identifying potential witnesses. However, in the light of the serious allegations made in the last few weeks, we have decided in consultation with Mr Warnock to widen the scope of the review beyond the Council's decision making. It is clear that to ensure there is public confidence in the thoroughness of the review, we must widen its scope to include the review of all information available to the Council. We will therefore need to allocate substantially more resources and more time to enable a thorough review to be conducted. Of course, any evidence obtained which is relevant to allegations of criminal activity will be forwarded to Greater Manchester Police. In the light of the scale of the enlarged review, we have decided to instruct external solicitors, Hempsons, and to second one of the Council's principal solicitors to assist the review. Due to his other commitments, Mr Warnock is unavailable for the timescale which this new widened investigation will require. We have therefore appointed Neil Garnham QC to head the expanded review. Mr Garnham is a leading SIL in public inquiry law, acted as counsel to the Victoria Climbié inquiry and sits as a Deputy High Court Judge. It is Mr Garnham's intention to provide his report by the end of July 2014. The report may be final or interim depending on the conclusions he is able to reach. We have asked Mr Garnham to liaise with Greater Manchester Police to ensure that his review does not compromise any element of the current investigations pursued by the police. The Council will publish Mr Garnham's report as soon as possible after he delivers it to us. Please note the independent review team will include Neil Garnham QC, Alistair Henderson and Lois Williams Counsel, Principal Solicitor, and Catherine Sheldrick of Hempson Solicitors Manchester. The Council will have no role in the conduct of the review beyond the supply of documentation and will not comment further on the review until the report is published. Some interviews may be carried out with key witnesses, but that will be a matter for the decision by the review team. I will now read out the terms of reference for the review. Firstly, Neil Garnham QC will conduct an independent review of all information available to the Council, both information that it presently holds and, so far as it can be ascertained, information it has previously held, which suggests that during the period 1961 to 1995, sexual or physical abuse of children took place. It may have taken place at premises owned, managed or operated by the Council, which involved pupils or residents under the age of 18 attending establishments funded by the Council, and for which Council officers or employees were responsible, for which councillors were responsible, for which school governors appointed by the Council were responsible. Secondly, Mr Garnham will seek to identify whether there was a pattern to such abuse, whether the abuse of children was tolerated, facilitated or promoted by the Council or its officers or staff, and whether there was a culture at the Council which inhibited the proper investigation, exposure and prevention of such abuse. Thirdly, the review will include allegations that are currently the subject of existing civil claims against the Council. But Mr Garnham Mr. Gannon will not seek to determine any question of civil liability. Fourthly, the focus of the review will be the events occurring between 1961 and 1995. However, if Mr. Gannon's review reveals a pattern of abuse or an attitude towards abuse which existed in 1995 and continued thereafter, he will include that in his consideration. Fifthly, if the investigations reveal evidence of criminal activity which has not led to date to convictions, he will not be investigating whether offences occurred, nor will he purport to determine any criminal liability. Instead, such information will be forwarded to the Greater Manchester Police. The review will consider, however, the Council's knowledge of and response to such evidence, whether criminals' convictions followed or not. Where such evidence indicated the potential commission of disciplinary rather than criminal offences, that will be considered as part of the review. And finally, Mr. Gannon is to provide a written report of his review by the 31st of July 2014, or as soon as possible thereafter. That report may be a final report if he is able to reach conclusions on the issues identified. Alternatively, it may be an interim report if the review concludes that further investigation is required. After the review is completed, or if Greater Manchester Police indicate to Mr. Gannon that a full report might compromise police investigations, Mr. Gannon may make such recommendations as he believes appropriate. The Deputy Chief Executive has already outlined the legal reasons why we cannot take any questions at this stage. If I can thank you all for your attendance, it was extremely important that the Council answer recent criticism. So Peter Fyde, the Chief Constable, will now provide an update from Greater Manchester Police.
For some time now, we've been carrying out an investigation into allegations of abuse at Knowlview. A number of new suspects and new victims have been identified as a result of that investigation. And there are a significant number of people that we are trying to trace, and obviously made more difficult by the passage of time. As a result of the publicity and the discussion around the book recently published about child abuse in Rochdale, we are carrying out a review into those allegations and into other matters of public debate around that book to see whether that justifies a criminal investigation into allegations of cover-up. We note the decision of the Council to commission this new review. That is a separate matter for the Council, but clearly we will be liaising with the QC to make sure there is nothing in his work which could compromise our criminal investigation into abuse, and also to ensure that any evidence or material that he picks up as part of his review which relates to potential criminal investigation is passed to us. I would like to appeal for any victims of abuse to come forward. We recognise this is a hugely difficult decision for the people involved, particularly when they involve events many years ago. But we can assure them that we have highly trained officers, but also say that if initially they do not wish to approach the police, they can approach the NSPCC, Children's Society, Barnardo's, or one of the other support organisations. Clearly, we'd also appeal for any evidence relating to the allegations of cover-up, particularly from people who may have been involved in those investigations at that time. The review into the matters in the book is being conducted by officers from the Major Investigation Team of our Serious Crime Division and will be overseen by a senior detective, and obviously the progress will be reported through to me and the Police and Crime Commissioner. I'd just like to point out that investigations into abuse are extremely difficult. They do take a long time because of often the damaged effects on the particular victims, the need for corroboration, and as I said, that is often made more difficult over the passage of time. But we are determined to do a very thorough investigation, and obviously when we're carrying out investigations into abuse institutions, clearly we also look at the liability of those who may have been involved in running those institutions. But we are determined, as I say, to carry out a thorough investigation into all these matters. Given the degree of public speculation around this particular book and the allegations made in it, we think it would clearly be strange if we didn't look at that and carry out a review as to, as I say, whether that justified a wider criminal investigation. Thank you.
Eleanor from BBC News. You say you've got some significant information. Could you spell out a little bit more what you mean by the significant evidence and information? And Councillor Lambert, will your new investigation have the power to call senior Lib Dems, for example, Lord Steele?
I mean, what I've said is we have a significant number of people that we are trying to trace. So this relates to the Noel View investigation. A number of victims have come forward. We have a significant number of people that we are trying to trace. And as I say, it's because of the passage of time and that they clearly have moved to different parts of the country, potentially different parts of the world, that will take some time as of abuse. We would obviously encourage them to come forward.
You said you had a number of new suspects as well. That's a very strong phrase.
Well, we have identified a number of suspects from our investigation. Yes. New victims have come forward. There are a number of new suspects, and as I say, there is a wider group of people we are trying to trace who we believe may have information.
Are we talking about 5, fewer, more?
I say, we won't speculate. We've got a number of victims that have come forward. As I say, it is this wider group of people, because clearly we want to, overall, in an investigation like this, you want to try and speak to clearly anybody that was at the institution to make sure you've done the most thorough investigation and anybody who can offer information who may have been a victim of abuse that comes forward, and that is why these investigations take a considerable length of time. They are very complex, and obviously we are carrying out a number of investigations into different institutions across Greater Manchester.
But to have suspects rather than persons of interest, you clearly have names, you have people you want to get hold of who you think may be perpetrators. How many are we talking about?
Well, so we are a number of inquiries that we're carrying out. Certainly, as I say, there are a number of suspects that we are looking at. That is all dependent on the information coming forward. It's dependent on things where the victims want to actually pursue things in the justice system. As I say, it is a very thorough investigation. It's an ongoing investigation. Yeah.
I think
Any
you
of your
identified 11 suspects at last count. You identified 11 suspects.
It is about 10 or 11. I'd say there's always a difficulty about the definition of things like using words like suspects. At the end of the day, we've got to get to a position, number one, which would justify an arrest, and clearly which would then justify investigation.
How many have you arrested so far out of the 11?
I don't believe there's any arrests at the moment, because you have. This is part of the difficulty of trying to make sure you gather as much information as possible that is coming out of this inquiry. As I say, this is just in the nature of the investigations we have carried out into a number of institutions as a result of obviously historical allegations.
But if you have a suspect, what?
This school in 1990. It's 22 years, in fact, since there was a surveillance unit from Greater Manchester Police working at public loos where boys at the school were sexually active with older men. That's 22 years. You say these investigations take a long time. It's almost a quarter of a century.
Well, I mean, I can't obviously answer for things that happened in another period when there was a very different culture and when even things were illegal which are no longer illegal. We've been carrying out a very, very thorough investigation into Noel View since the latest allegations came forward, obviously using techniques and using the law as it is now and the different culture in the criminal justice system, and we are determined to take that forward. I mean, clearly, one of the issues in this whole matter is the period of time and the way that allegations have been made and when been dealt with. But, you know, I'll come back to it. All these investigations are very complex and very difficult to get to the sort of standards which would then justify prosecution. And often there are, in all sorts of investigations that we carry out, There are many, many reasons why we cannot get evidence to the point which would justify a prosecution.
And
Are any of your suspects current or former politicians?
Well, so we are concentrating at the moment, looking at Knollview and the people that come forward and the people that are identified, and then clearly, as I say, we'll review the other material in the book and see whether that itself justifies a criminal investigation and who would be the right people to carry out that criminal investigation.
This school was founded by Sir Cyril Smith and...
Back in the early 1990s, the council commissioned a report which highlighted the abuse going on at that school. Surely the police were made aware of that at the time.
David, as I say, it's very difficult for me to talk about things which happened long before I was chief constable. I mean, clearly we are looking into that, and as you know as well, there have been various reviews into those allegations over the passage of years. All I can do as chief constable now is make sure there is the most thorough investigation to encourage more victims to come forward.